Hi everybody, welcome to another episode of Not Another Tooling Podcast with myself, Austin Pearson, and my co-host, Mr. Matt Malcolm. I see we're both on the coffee today.
Yeah, I noticed you're drinking black coffee. You don't drink black coffee?
I do, yeah, although it is decaf, gotta say. No caffeine for me, but what are you drinking?
Espresso. It's espressos. I was dieting a year or so ago, a bit more than that. I used to drink flat whites. That was the default drink.
Yeah.
And then clearly didn't really feel the need to take in all the calories from the milk. So I stopped drinking flat whites. When I came off the diet, didn't like flat whites anymore. It's quite sad, really. Greg's was one of my favorites. Gone. Marks and Spencer had good and gone. The blonde roast with a flat white from Starbucks was my favorite. Another favorite. Gone. Just didn't have the taste for it. So now just double espresso. But I'll taste the difference like significantly now. It goes without saying, but I'll be able to go from one to another, and then if I haven't got the right dial in, the right the various settings you can apply, you can taste it straight away. That's sour, that's bitter. I'll tune it down a bit. I'll do this. Anyway, this isn't a podcast about coffee. Yep.
Which leads us nicely onto today's topic, which is all about why is my infrastructure always out of compliance? And I wanted to talk about this today because I've been working with almost every client I'm working with at the moment is struggling. For me, particularly around networks, but this absolutely applies around server and storage and everything else as well. With having the old kind of backup recovery type approach to managing infrastructure, and then using spreadsheets, good old Excel, everyone's favorite reporting tool, or starting to move towards doing something a bit more clever, i.e., we're going to stand up a database in the cloud and we're going to try and get our backup tool to tell this database that we're in policy or out of policy and blah 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 blah. But anyway, that's I'm seeing a lot of that at the moment. And but I guess the starting point is like, why do we even need to do this in the first place?
Yeah, so what?
Yeah. So what, Matt? Who cares?
Well, put me on the spot there, but yeah, ultimately there's a few spaces where the so what would be addressed. Ignoring the factor of it being a compliance related problem, there's going to be some operational impact in some spaces. There could be some financial impact which could relate to the operational. There could be some cyber or some security impacts. All of these things ultimately interlink, and like observation from the past typically kicks off because of one of those things. Operationally, something is just broke. We need to be better at doing it, make it faster, all the rest of that jazz. Or we've got some big fine coming because we didn't know this, and it could be a number of reasons why that fine might come. Or there's been some sort of cyber attack or something. Those are normally, other than proactive organizations, those are normally the catalysts that get people to go, we need to go and address this.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. Though most of the customers that I'm working with at the moment are suffering with not meeting audit requirements. Right, we need to go do something about it. But actually, when you start digging into the problems that you've mentioned there's also this kind of day-to-day operational support. I think it's really a level 1, 2 support jobs are flipping hard, right? They don't have enough data most of the time, and they're scrabbling around trying to find out which CI is causing the problem and then diagnosing it an hour after the incident has happened and yada, yada, yada. If they then go in and find that CI is not the standard CI because somebody has changed X, Y, and Z, then it makes it so much harder for them to troubleshoot and support. And there's this, if everything looks the same, you know what you're looking for. As soon as something isn't the same, it's not even twice as long. It's like 4 or 5 times as long often. And I think that's a really, really good reason to even if you don't have one of the other problems knocking on your door and say, oh, you need to fix it because of this, but just to start thinking about this area and doing something about it.
So then some problems take place, or not in some cases. What is soup to nuts, dog's bollocks, the best version of this being done versus the worst? Maybe we look at those two examples, and then let's probably put some things in place that allow people to move along that maturity sort of stage, so to speak. So Nirvana state, very, very clear, all the rest of it, and I'll let you fill in those gaps, through to you're not in a good place, and then we can put some little milestones in place on what we've seen work and not work.
Okay. So
See what I did there? I just passed it back to you.
Thank you. So I'd say, you know, the Nirvana state, which is it's very, very rare, is where firstly an organization has got a handle on what this really looks like for them. So they really understand the problems that they will get into if they don't solve configuration management well, and they've thought about them and they are proactively addressing them. So they're saying, okay, right, not just we've got this set of compliance policies that we need to address, but also in the future those are likely to change, so we need to be constantly reviewing this and constantly making sure we're doing a better job. Or, you know, from a cyber perspective, you know, we absolutely need to make sure that everything complies with our security policy all the time, and if something doesn't, we need to be alerted on that and we need to prioritize it, because, you know, in the network world, that's, you know, network tools is like the second place a hacker will go and look for backdoors and things like that. So I think that having that awareness first and planning for what are we trying to achieve, being really clear on that with all stakeholders, and then having a plan that constantly reviews that and is future looking is like step number one, which sounds really obvious, but it isn't, because what people typically do is what you described. They have a problem with cyber or financial impact or whatever it is, and then they go attack it from that. We need to solve that problem. So that's the kind of mindset of, I think, what Nirvana looks like is a proactive, regularly reviewed strategy around that space. What have you seen?
Pretty much, I think the word sums it up best: the proactive position versus the observations, at least the engagements I've been involved in, are very much something's gone down, sometimes their network, and they need to go and quickly make that not happen again, and in a very reactive state. So like the Nirvana state, yeah, super proactive, and we're filling those gaps because there's some milestones for people to get to that point, I think. Yes. And then in the reactive space, I mean, generally the worst position is you just don't know. You just don't know. People are implementing changes and not knowing what they're going to impact. The system's gone down and you don't know where about in the system it could be impacted. Like just the lack of visibility. The one up from that, which is super common still now, is that we have a static repository. I mean, Excel spreadsheets is king in that space, clearly. And not that all spreadsheets are bad, but often they're going to be out of date. So like that very reactive position based upon sometimes none or most common static data, that's like the maturity level 1 versus proactive, and I'm planning to do these things, is like the maturity level 10 if this was our scale. Yeah,
I'd agree. And like, you know, that number 1 there, I think, yeah, I've seen some interesting examples. So I was working with an airline somewhere in the world who didn't even know that they owned certain assets. And so like, if you don't know they exist, it's very, very hard to manage them, make sure they're compliant, secure, all of that sort of stuff, and they only found out when they had an outage, so they had a financial impact because they couldn't get planes off the ground. And then suddenly, oh, hang on a minute, we've sent some engineers on site and they've discovered all this network infrastructure that isn't in our CMDB. It hasn't got our standard policies on it. Nobody knows it exists. And yeah, complete nightmare. And to be fair to them, thankfully, it was only an outage of some planes delayed that cost them something like $7 million.
I thought I was going to stop then. It's an outage of some planes. I was like, that's terrible. Okay.
No, just plane delays. I think it was like $7 million worth of cost. It cost them for that, but it could have been so much worse if they'd have got hacked, right? Some got in and went, oh, here's all these open network devices that nobody's managing. They've still got this standard passwords on and all that sort of stuff, and could have been horrendous for them. So there are definitely, like, that is worst case scenario, I think.
So like your worst case scenario, and that's not uncommon at all. Definitely that we don't know what we've got scenario. That's super common still now with all the great technology and all that jazz.
Yeah.
Visibility. That's the first step, is like visibility. Yeah, you might have a static repository. Maybe you do, maybe you don't. But if you want to have at least an attempt to try and mature this space, you got to have visibility of what's going on. And that could be still a spreadsheet. I'm not against a spreadsheet. If there's an ability to keep it fed and watered, cool, go crazy. SQL database, yep, as long as you've got a mechanism to keep it alive, let's call it. So that would be some process in place to maintain it, which is fine. Not perfect, but fine. Or ideally some technology or tool or something, a discovery, whatever it might be. But start with the visibility, and then you can move on to, I don't know if there's 3 stages, but the more common ground in terms of maturity levels is then the ability to like manage the thing. Like, I can see it, I can do things with it, I can make my plans, I can send it to retire it, I've got updates, I've got this, I've got that, it's linked to your processes. That's like most common level of maturity. So visibility, some people still aspire to eventually get there. Most common, at least my engagements, have been then able to manage the thing. And when I say manage it, they're seeing it in context to some system that's linked to other systems, be that CMDB or other, could be anything else. The bit which is less common is essentially what people get sold and probably not always get to, is then that ability to automate, orchestrate, do the stuff, not just proactively, but do it in a less human intensive manner. That's like quite mature. So those 3 buckets, like,
I'd split those out actually. I'd say like visibility managed, and then level 3 is automated, and then level 4 is proactive, right? Because automated is good, definitely a great step. Now you know what you've got and you can start to do stuff with it. But then proactive is like another level on top. I think that it's almost unheard of, I think.
I don't know. I mean, there are some really competent asset management and config functions in the estate, and if they've got a grip of their environment, obviously with a dependency on the people that need to do it, it's not crazy, but it's definitely a maturity step.
Well, no, and actually you raise a really good point there, because what you said, in some parts of the estate, and I think that's really true, is like you'll often find that server, for example, is in a far better state than network is for config management, right? And you're like, why are you treating these as separate functions? You've still got the same challenge at a top level. They all need to be compliant. They've all got the same impacts if things go down. But I think just because we store business data on servers, you often get a much better level of management around those that you wouldn't necessarily get on other pieces of infrastructure.
Is that almost tiered? I was trying to think then, like, is there some logical correlation between the business thing versus the underpinning infrastructure. It's like network, I agree, like they're something else. They're sometimes not in the conversation, so to speak, versus server is everyone, that's the standard, versus probably I'd say even more eyes on is the application level. So people that are dealing with the application know it intimately and are able to do whatever they need to do with it, whether they're writing, getting updates. That seems to be, in some cases, the best maintained space, purely because of how, well, maybe not old school applications, but modern ones, how they're managed and orchestrated versus the underpinning infrastructure. And I'm just trying to think realistically, the level of engagement seems higher at the application end versus the, what's this mainframe thing?
Oh, yeah, that's interesting actually. And I think that definitely has been the case, because in the world that we've lived in, you've got these high profile applications and you knew where they were. Now, as we're moving to like microservices and cloud and whatever, I kind of feel like it's even harder to do, because you're like, right, we're spinning up a complex multi-tier thing for 10 minutes to show an advert at halftime on the football, and then we're tearing it down again. And there's almost a bit of a, right, well, we just need to do that, and then we're done, and you kind of forget about, well, yeah, but it still needs to be in the CMDB. Somebody needs to know about it. If there's an issue with it, it still needs to be compliant with everything. There's still a massive impact to us if somebody hacked it or blah 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 blah. So yeah, it's kind of coming a bit full circle, I think, to being a bit more complex than it used to be.
There's probably some arguments there around like what level of content people drip into the CMDB, right, in terms of what they need to manage versus not. Is it the configuration of the thing or the thing? And that's a separate conversation, I suppose. But ultimately, like boiling it down, visibility, that's to trigger that visibility. Then you can get your hands around and do some stuff, and eventually that some stuff will manifest itself into some proactive stuff. Like that generally is the maturity curve that people would need to follow to avoid the scenarios where I'd normally be on board. It is some cyber issues took place, some operational stuff needs to be addressed, or we've got some fine or financial impacts happening. Avoid that, move to that state.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, so first step for people then who are not as mature as they'd like to be in this stage, I think is, number one, you need to get the right stakeholders together to start having a conversation. And I think we've just decided that those stakeholders are in two groups, right? There's this kind of, you've got some compliance stakeholders, you've got some operational stakeholders, some financial stakeholders, some cyber stakeholders, but then you've also got the different parts of the infrastructure stakeholders as well, right? And the applications and whatever. So you can have an application and an infrastructure and a network and all those different types of stakeholders. So trying to get them together so that everybody can agree on what is it that where do you want to be? Where are you now as an organization? Where do you want to be? What the priorities are, and setting out a plan so that you understand on that roadmap, okay, right, visibility, we're okay in server, but we're not in storage, let's say. So we need to bring that up. Okay, step one, let's get everything to visibility layer. Right, now what do we do for managed? And then have some checkboxes that says, okay, so that's great. So now we've made improvement on operational impact, because we know that when a support engineer goes to look at this sort of network device, there's now a repository that he can go to and say, oh, look, actually, the last time we checked this device, it was out of compliance with our standard policy. So I can be aware of that, and I know it's going to take me a bit longer to fix, etc. And you've sort of you understand the impact that you're making. And the very first one on visibility is like, from a cyber perspective, we know what we have, therefore we can start to secure what we have. You know, there's all these sort of tick boxes along the way that bring business benefits, because at the end of the day, you're going to need a business case to go do something and have people spend some time on it. Maybe you need tools, maybe you don't need tools, maybe you need some outside help, whatever, but there'll be some level of investment. And so therefore you want to tick off what you're giving back to the business every time you move up a level. I think. Does that make sense?
Yep, good summary. I'm just thinking overarching, and we're like right into not the weeds necessarily, but we're talking about the different things around this stuff that we need.
Yeah.
But realistically, and which is unrealistic because it's not super common, if an organization was very mature in both asset and config, and I'll say them separately because depending on what they need to do is going to be different work streams, different processes. If they're generally mature in those spaces, these problems are less likely, not unlikely, because it could still take place, but generally if an organization has a mature asset and a config footprint, and say footprint, ability to deliver those processes and probably technology to support them, then these issues less likely, very less likely. Process drives the right requirements, which would ultimately feed and water the back end of it, and would give that visibility because they need to control these things in the first place. But for some reason, and it still baffles me, you know, organizations pay, observation wise, less and less attention up front to asset and config, then try and use all of their service management systems and processes with a fundamental part which isn't there. And it'd be like, bad analogy, but like trying to like ride a bike with square wheels. They could have just rounded the edge by fulfilling those processes and they'd be a lot smoother. But instead, they just try and battle through with these square wheels, which in some cases cause compliance issues or other. But it's such a fundamental part that if that was in order, clearly it's not, which is why we're having this conversation, then generally those other downstream things are less likely. Again, not impossible, not going to happen, but much less likely.
Yeah, I agree. And I think it's, you know, we've talked about the whole ITSM buying far too much than you need in your ITSM discussion, but this is one of those overlooked areas, I think, that actually is fairly fundamental to having a great functioning IT operations department. I think so. Good stuff. You got anything else you want to chuck in?
Well, you just dipped on the visibility there, and I suppose just let's paint the picture. So we know we've got a visibility thing. So there's probably some way we're going to go and get it. Be that tool or process, however we're going to get data. We're going to get into a place where we can see all the things we need to see, driven from the right requirements or necessity, whatever else. What about managing it now? So how are we going to manage these things? How are we going to do stuff for these things? How are we going to get to the automated space? Right, do you know, quickly cover that off with the last few minutes of that path, knowing that realistically, the visibility and management is probably a large proportion of the space, but the nirvana stage, like what are those steps for people?
Yeah, so once you understand what you've got and you're able to manage it in a basic way, it's very, assuming that you are reporting that on a regular basis, right, through your service desk, this is another great time for taking an incident extract purely related to config type issues and incidents, and then you can start to tick off, right, what are the ones that we have the most challenges with, and how do we, let's pick those as the first ones we're going to automate. You know, if somebody calls in every single day because we have this problem, then firstly, do we need to start working on this as a problem, or is this a great case for automation? You know, and some of the automations are really simple, right? Like, okay, this device is out of compliance with our security policy. So somebody needs to raise an incident and tell us so that we can review it and take some action on it. You know, I mean, you could go really fierce on that, right? There's some great technology out there these days that will say, actually, you can't, your device is totally locked down and you can't take it out of of compliance with policy, but that's not necessarily a great thing, because sometimes you have to fix issues, right? And the revenue impact of not fixing the issue is often greater than the risk of it not being compliant. But you need, that's a really simple example of moving to automation. But there's loads more, but just use the data that you've got, and keep going through it, and then keep reviewing it, and keep getting the stakeholders back together and say, okay, what can we do to move the needle again? How are we doing? Right, we've made it to level 3, right? Well, what does proactive look like for us as an organization? What would be really important to us if we could see before something is likely to go out of compliance? What technology is out there to help us do that could make us more organized. I don't know if I've answered your question there, but
yeah, I think pretty much down the path. And I don't think we need to cover off the sort of back end, really, because once you've got that visibility of seeing it, some ability to do something to it, then the use cases will unfold themselves, because at least you've got the foundation, I guess, versus any of the more fancy stuff. But you're right, there's a bunch of technology out there, different products, be it native functionality or add-ons or other products, which is more common, I think, as well, able to better manage an infrastructure estate, be that the network side or the infrastructure side. But yeah, first step, just get some visibility. A way to keep that up to date. How are you going to achieve it? Make sure your processes are consuming the content correctly. Say correctly, whatever is correct for your organization. And then the rest of it then should be more natural to unfold them. Yeah. Versus, I suppose, what's a normal scenario you would see is people try and jump the gun, get to that fancy use case scenario without these building blocks in place. Well, that is less common, but the less common is obviously getting the data in the first place. The ability to fast forward to automating and orchestrating stuff.
Yeah, I've just thought of something else that I want to throw in before we recap. Is every time you're doing this, you want to look at what's your MVP for getting to visibility, getting to manage, etc., because there is a tendency, particularly in the compliance and the security world, to want to absolutely boil the ocean. And I get it. I mean, security is super, super important, but there can be so many barriers that you don't actually get anything done. So try and work with what does an MVP look like, and then you can add things onto that as you go.
Yeah.
Cool. Wonderful. Right. So today we have talked about, firstly, what are the main drivers for doing something about your infrastructure always being out of compliance, which we decided were failing compliance audits, operational impact, financial impact, cyber impact, and day-to-day operational support impact. We looked at what the nirvana is, which is a proactive strategy that is all-encompassing, versus the opposite of that, which is I can't even see what I've got, let alone manage it. We talked about the 4 levels of maturity here. Number 1, visibility, which we defined as just having a record, even if it's in Excel or SQL, and that's updated regularly. Then into managed, where you're taking some actions to make sure things are in policy, etc. Number 3 is then moving to automation, and number 4 is getting to proactive. And then we talked about where do we start with that on this journey. First thing is getting all the stakeholders together. They are from the various kind of business divisions there: security, compliance, financial, operations, etc. But they're also from the different technology silos, so server, network, storage, security, etc., and bringing those all together, and then creating an MVP for each step. so that you're not trying to boil the ocean all the time, and that you are making progress. And then when you're making progress, you're making measurable progress that you can go back to the business and say, hey, not only can we see all of our stuff now, but that means that we are less at risk of a cyber attack. Blah, 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 blah. What have I missed in my summary?
That's it. Yeah, all of it. Good summary.
Beautiful. Wonderful. Thank you very much. And I must say, it must be much warmer down your neck of the woods than it is here today. So you've got a short sleeve shirt on today, and however many miles you've done on this podcast today,
I don't know, not much.
Wonderful. Right, everyone, thank you very much for watching. If you've got any particular challenges you've come across in this space, or any questions or observations, please drop them in the comments below. We'd love to hear from you. And as always, if you have any future topics you'd like to hear about on the podcast, please let myself or Matt know, or drop a comment on the page. And if you'd like to be a guest on a future live version of the podcast, please reach out to us and we would love to have you along. So thank you very much.
Thanks. See ya.